Thank you so much for your lecture. It is an honor for me, a great privilege to be here and to interview you. I will start to ask you, while you point many areas where, in which we are making progress, you also highlight a world of poverty, growing inequality, of hate, becoming more and more mainstream. As a mother, as parents, how do we give hope to our children when the negative messages about the others and message of hate are becoming mainstream mainly through social media and other channels and even in politics?
I think it's even more when you see this pushback against what should be the norm, that you need to revisit that in your families. I think that the role of parenthood must be one that we take responsibility. In my family, for instance, we ban the use of the word right from the very beginning of hate. We don't use hate in our family at all. I hear so many family children saying, I hate this and I hate that and I hate the other, and I say, no, we're not going to use the word hate. You can dislike intensely, but no hate. And I think that this is, something that you do from the upbringing. I think also I've looked over the years, as we were brought up, what were the things that I had that made me the person I am today that I need to pass on to my children? And I think that healthy respect for the people in your community starts in the family. Families that we come from are large, and I always say that in Nigeria, Nigerians, if they stretch their hand, they can touch poverty in their home. Now we lived a privileged life because I was, the daughter of a civil servant. But in our communities, we had very poor family and you needed to respect that, and you needed to teach your children. So it really does start from the seed that you grow and how you nurture that. Islamically, we follow the 3 sevens. The first 7 years of your child's life are about nurturing them and loving them. The second are about discipline. So really explaining what is acceptable, what is not, in terms of tolerance and respect. And the third, they become your friend. Because any child after 14 that doesn't have a healthy respect to their parents and is a friend, you're going to have great difficulty trying to convince them otherwise later on. So I think from the family, from the society, this starts. And then I think that, you very quickly become part of a society in a workplace. The places that we take for granted are the ones that you need the most to deal with. And I think that here you will come across such diversity of opinion, of upbringing, of things that you in your own space would not feel you could tolerate. But that's all the more reason why you have to. And today, as I said, when you see people pushing back, largely it is ignorance, it is fear, and I think that you have to embrace that head on and deal with it and keep people informed and more knowledge, more understanding. As they say, you show love and you will get some back. I had a difficult childhood. I'm a person of color. And it was very strange because I at one point went to school in a place where there were no people of color, and so this became a challenge for us, discrimination. And my mother, who is white, would say to me, well, okay, so if this is the names they're calling you, maybe you can call them these names. But in my head, I was of two. And so that sense of identity that I belonged to the world and I could take the best out of either side was one that I would, in the end, stop and explain to people and try to ask the question, why so much discrimination, why so much hate? It was, in the end, 9 times out of 10, it was a lack of knowledge, it was ignorance, it was fear, you were different. And I think that these basic human feelings you need to deal with. And sometimes we pay too much notice to the technical. We become very theoretical and we forget the human side of it.
Okay, you talked about the gap between words and action, sometimes due to a lack of political will. Political will is often shaped by popular sentiment, and we've been seeing that movement around the world, mainly on Western countries, but not only. How do we mobilize people to support greater inclusion when at the same time we have these political trends moved by popular sentiments?
I think most of us today who have thought we had passed certain levels of accepting human rights and and respect and tolerance for one another are horrified at what we have seen in changes of leadership. But I think we have to ask the question, why? People are not born with hate. They're not born in positions where they would become terrorists. There are root causes to this, and I think that perhaps over the years there has been a number who have felt excluded. And so the lack of trust in institutions and in leadership that thought they had everyone in the tent and didn't. And so I think it's very important for us to engage, to continue doing what is the right thing and advocating for it, but always leave the conversation open, never close the door, never think that this has gone so wrong that we cannot engage with what we're hearing. I think if we don't, we will be worse off for it, and could you imagine a worse? We have many countries where we negotiated, for instance, the Global Compact on Migration. In that negotiation, if you really heard some of the positions that were put forward, we would have thought that this world was going to collapse and that we would never get a Global Compact on Migration. But in the UN, the larger number of countries, not the few that didn't sign on, the larger number believed in the good of migration and in the need for us to address it and to put something on the table that we could all see as a global endeavor. It took a while, and I have to say that as we got closer to signing on to the Global Compact on Migration, we were not sure if it was going to happen because of a few. But I think in the end, the majority pulled and came through with it, and today we're looking at over 130 countries where we're mapping how we roll out that Global Compact on Migration. So it is, as Antonio Guterres often tells us, many headwinds, navigate them, just don't give up. Do not give up on what seems to be a regression in what we see for human rights, for tolerance, for basic, forwarding of our agendas for prosperity and peace.
But when you look at a region like Europe, and the European Union is at the same time an economical club, an elite. At the same time, we have a demographic issue, a problem, but at the same time, we don't know how to deal with the refugees in some of our biggest countries and most developed countries.
I think we're beginning to understand how to do that. I think that we have not been honest enough to have the conversations that are uncomfortable. There's a lot of very nice diplomacy around many issues. People are afraid to upset the status quo that is going in the wrong direction. I think that you have to stop that and have those honest conversations. They've begun to happen. The recent elections in the European Union were ones that no one thought we would get. We thought maybe a third of the results would go to the more popularist side. We didn't see that. So I think that what I would say is that voices of those who believe should come out of shock and amplify what is right, and to try to get back that space that we lost, and to understand why we lost it and how we need to keep it. Now, this is where I think that we do begin to talk about a universal agenda, the Agenda 2030. Those 17 goals are applicable to North, South, East, and West. This is not a developing country narrative. That's not the story anymore. We're witnessing globalization that has been exclusive to few, and we need to make that just, and we have the ways and means to do it, and part of that is to address our economies, to address leadership with the right arguments for being more inclusive.
Okay. You cite both Canada and Portugal as exemplary in trying to create more inclusive and equal societies, but at the same time, Canada is a big country, Portugal is a very small country. Can we put those two such different countries on the same level?
When you come to the United Nations, everyone has a voice. It's how you use that voice, whether you are big or you are small. I see Portugal, first of all, we have seen a leader that's taken the helm of affairs as the Secretary-General. And he could have just been a scripted Secretary-General. But he comes with an enormous amount of experience and a history, not only as a leader of a country, but as one who in the United Nations led an agency that looked at the humanitarian crisis. Coming in, what he brings with him, and I say this only as Antonio Guterres because he's one example I can use here and now, but there are many, many Portuguese, many leaders that do this in their individual and collective way. And what he brings is a vision for, first, he has the opportunity to say, let's prevent the crisis around the world. We don't have to keep tolerating this, and we need to do something about stemming that, and he believes the 2030 agenda is one. At the same time, he said, do we need to continue with the conflict? Do we need to continue with the crises we see around the world? How can we now move that to a vision of transition? That we actually have an exit strategy for crisis, that we're not sitting in it for a decade after decade, keeping the peace without really looking at what the root causes are for that. So I think that from a small country comes great vision and the courage to put that on the table and use your experiences, as we say, for making that happen. For Canada, this is a federal system that mirrors many other systems that are not working as well. So they have a lot to share, acknowledging their past, and that things did not always work, but that did not stop you for trying to right the wrongs and to do that. And I think sharing this has been one of the credits that we would certainly give to Canada. I've seen that through the development work that we've done in federal systems that have had the challenge of how you include everyone from the local governments through states to a federal order of trying to policy make and govern.
Look at the country, at the world, where so different countries, so different stages. Is it possible to have the same goals when you speak about these kind of main questions? Is it possible?
Absolutely. I mean, you need to read the goals.
Yeah.
They're an odd number, and that's because the reality is not square. It's not got neat corners or completely round and perfect. The world is imperfect, and so those goals came in an imperfect number. We thought we could have 10. Let's move from 8 to 10. It's neatly packaged. We can communicate it. But it was not the reality of the world's reflection on what they needed to do. And what they put in this agenda at the center is economies. And to say the economies needed to be inclusive, that we needed to have equality. People needed to be part of what it was that was growing. So if a country like mine is growing and 80% of the population are living below the poverty line, something is wrong. And we need to acknowledge that and we need to fix it. So if you look at the goals, I don't think there is a goal that doesn't apply to Portugal.
But is it fair to have the same goals on Germany and Nigeria at this time?
It's the same goals, they're just prioritized differently.
Mm-hmm.
You may not have to do much on ending poverty in Germany, but you certainly have a lot to do on inequalities, on the transition for energy, on some of the economic inclusion, so on circular economy. You prioritize them differently, but those 17, I believe, apply to every country today. There is a universal challenge that we need to address, and there isn't any one country that those 17 goals don't apply to.
Okay, good answer.
Took 4 years for us to get there.
Okay.
But let me say, it wasn't just the governments. Huh? I mean, really, foundations, civil society, young people. I mean, they told us about the world we want, and it was not what we thought. And you know, after 2 years, I was reading The World We Wanted by young people, and then I read from the Nordic countries, and they wanted water and education. And I thought, okay, hold on a minute, there's something really wrong here. As far as I know, Sweden and Norway don't have a problem with access to potable water or education. But what they were doing, they still hadn't got round to the universal agenda. So they were giving us a world they wanted for others and not looking in the mirror. And once we turned that question around, we then found different answers coming from countries like that talked about equality, that talked about gender parity, which, you know, we all know now, the figures are showing us that there's a universal issue. And so this is very much an agenda that was designed, I think, by the world. Everyone had participated, business participated. At the beginning in 2012, we spoke different languages, completely different languages. They would come into the UN, we would talk that way, they would talk the other way. Eventually, we've come, you know, with an understanding that there are principles, and it's not corporate social responsibility that needs to increase, it's the business model that needs to change to make it more sustainable, that people and the environment are at the center, and that you can still make profits, but not off the back of people and planet.
Last question. As a journalist, I must ask you what role you see for the media in galvanizing support for the goals and for the action to reduce inequalities, at the same time where the media sometimes tend to act like a mirror of a political landscape that is changing a lot and becoming more polarized.
I think maybe two things. I think the media needs to tell a good story. We don't often tell good stories. And so therefore, the projection of what's happening in the world is much more negative than it is the positives.
But you know that you lived in the UK, that sometimes the bad story, it runs pretty well, and
it's an excuse.
Yeah.
It's an excuse. You are smart people, and you know how to get a headline. It doesn't always have to be a bad one. Mm-hmm. There are good headlines, and you can do that. Now, why should you do that? Well, after you go home, 9 to 5, and you go home, you're one of the 7.5 billion people on this earth.
Yeah.
And so what happens to this earth matters. What happens to our communities matters. So you need to take that responsibility of future generations into your workplace, and to say it's not just about I'm the media person today, but I'm also a person, a human being, and I have an individual and collective responsibility to make sure that we give back, and that we do look at our humanity, and that we are about each and every one of us, but coexisting, and not to think you can sacrifice. You know, the media has a lot to do whether we see things positively or not. And now it's even more difficult for you because you say media, but social media is a whole new ballgame, which many of us don't understand, but it's here to stay. It's not going away. It is the world of young people. It has enormous contributions to make to connecting our world, to connecting people, but it also has a dark side. And unless we grapple with a balance in that, then we won't end up well, and media will not be a part of our development, our sustainable development. In the end, I hope that we don't leave you behind. Because I think that this is, the way technology is going now, just as education is going, it's not all about the teacher in the classroom. It's about what you can access. And media needs to shape that. You need to shape your constituency and its contribution to our humanity.
Okay. Now you can have 2-3 questions from the audience. If someone wants to make some question to Ms. Amina Mohammed.
Especially young people.
Yeah, especially young people, yes. Okay.
Good afternoon. My name is Tomás Azevedo, and I'm a Deputy Diplomatic Advisor at the Prime Minister's Office. And thank you, Madam, for your lecture this evening. Being an African and a Muslim, I would ask you, how do you see the evolution of LGBT rights in both the Islamic world and in Africa? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Easy question, right?
Yeah.
Really difficult. Really difficult. I think when we talk about rights, we of course have to say all rights and they're indivisible. But one of the things that we don't underscore is progressive. We've said rights are indivisible, but we've said progressive. And I think that in Africa and Islam, this has to come along with a really healthy conversation about survival. And about respect for diversity, respect for everyone to choose their path, and that the only judge, at least in Islam as I know it, the only judge is God. And it's not people, and I think what we've done is taken over roles that we have no business doing. Everyone is entitled to their path, and to be judgmental of that and not accepting and discriminatory is something that we should never accept. So I think from our own community, we need to begin to see that. I think where the challenge is that at the same time is for everyone to see how those rights play out in our countries individually and collectively. How can we have that conversation that is not either or? I don't think that that's something that we can accept. So I hope that we will. I think the way sometimes we have the conversation of rights in our countries is about either or, and so you find. Places where they have great challenges in just living that daily life, not knowing if they're going to survive tomorrow, is not a conversation that they will have. And I think that this is wrong, but we have to find entry points for that. And I think that everyone, LGBT rights are as important as any other. These are people. This is us, and it's our family, and so we need to make sure they're inclusive. But it's not easy. We, across the world, different countries are at different levels. I think we have to find entry points in our recent reform in the UN. We've looked to say that, look, human rights is at the core of the universal agenda that we have today, the SDGs. How do we actually operationalize that? And I think here it's really important for us to have that conversation with the government, but also to have those that will help us to make sure that all rights are respected, irrespective of your beliefs.
Okay. Next question.
My name is Ines Relvas. I'm a project leader here in Boston Consulting Group from Lisbon. Working in a mainly male-dominated industry and in the big corporate companies here in Portugal, I would love to hear how the UN has reached gender parity in the leadership roles, and how can we do this better in the new companies? What kind of activities and what kind of initiatives actually worked from your perspective? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Leadership is key. I mean, without the leader we have, I wish I could take all the credit for Antonio Guterres, but he's a feminist. He's our #1 feminist. And so I think that men and women in leadership, you have to open up that space for it to happen. You have to put in a strategy that you follow. Putting gender parity in the United Nations 2 years ago didn't happen even when it started. We got such pushback. I mean, everybody mouthed that they thought gender parity was a great thing. But the practice of it was huge. It was a huge pushback. So we followed that from where the Secretary-General had sway, so where he could take decisions over the appointments he made, he did that. I mean, either side of him is a woman. On our floor, we have parity. Within the resident coordinators that he appoints, 130 of them, we have parity. It takes more in our agencies, funds, and programs because they're governed differently, so you require a conversation with member states who govern. But you also require leadership from each and every one of those that lead the institutions. You need a conversation with men. I think, to assume that everybody thinks that the right thing is what we do is different, because for us, when we were trying to get parity, when men came for their renewals, it was unlikely they were going to get renewed where there was a better woman. So we opened up that space. I think what was more difficult for us has been in areas where there aren't the women, because in fact the training of women in the peace and security side is few and far between. So to go to academia, to go to where we would get more people, more women in science and encourage that in different countries, that's extra work, which is why our parity strategy will take to 2021. But it's a concerted effort to make it happen, and it also requires you as a person. In my conference room, I have a big, it's probably as big as the carpet over there, a big board that is just pictures of, it's a collage of women from all over the world, and leaders and otherwise. And behind me are the SDGs. So I always sit on the side where the SDGs are behind me, and then the women are behind the delegation that comes to meet me. And if the delegation is all men, I would say to them, well, today you're in good company because you're surrounded by women. And next time, maybe we could have a little bit of a balance. It's the conversation you have with people that they don't even realize that everything around them was men. I walked in here to the people who are doing a wonderful job live streaming us, but they were all men. And so I'm conscious of it, and I'll say it with the best intention that you can have women behind the camera. My daughter's a filmmaker, so I know it's possible. And I have to say that even there, when we talk about women, I said to my daughter, and this is terrible, I don't know if she's watching right now, but she wanted to be a film actress. And she said, this is what I want to do. And I thought, there's nothing wrong with them, but. So I convinced her that her life would be much longer behind the camera than in front of it. She'd have a longer career. But I think, genuinely, women deserve to have that opportunity to take up positions that they are qualified for. And should not be discriminated against. And many are left out. We still have, even when you get into a position of leadership, how do you sustain that? So is it just a woman that comes for a term, a president that comes in for 5 years, 10 years, and then is replaced by a man? How do we sustain women in leadership? And that needs a pipeline. It needs to make sure we're educated, we have the exposure, the experiences, that we can actually step into those positions when asked. It's not automatic, we have to earn it. But we also have to be given the opportunity to learn and to experience and to be exposed.
Okay. Any other question from the others? Yes, there. Last question.
My name is Cátia de Carvalho. I am a researcher from the University of Porto, and I am from the academia. And often we scientists find ourselves locked in an environment only composed by other scientists. And we would like to do more. And what I would like to know is, what is your advice for researchers, particularly for young researchers who want to help governments and the United Nations to achieve the SDGs. Thank you.
Thank you very
Really
much.
important to have research. I mean, thank you, scientists, for what you're doing on climate change to bring that reality to us so that we have the evidence that we can show for policy changes that need to be made. We could never address the G20 that have 82% of the emissions if we didn't have the science behind it. So we still need to keep at it. More people need to be involved. I think there are probably two things. One, we need to see much more action research. We need to get evidence in front of policymakers that they can use without having it go through 10 to 20 years of fine-tuning. You need to have it here and now to make the case, because it's such short-term, that cycle of leadership, and everyone wants to make a difference in that term. They don't very often see it as part of their legacy in a generation or two. So I think we need help there to make the case for why leadership should make the investments they need to make in the short term in order to get the long-term gains. That needs to happen. The second thing is that in this universal response that we require, we need to see much more resources being traded across academic institutions, north and south. There's huge amounts of practice and the reality of what is on the ground that does not have the resources to bring that out into the place where you can shape policy. In developing countries, there's very little resources. In developed countries, a huge amount of resources. The endowments that go into universities and places of learning are huge. How can you have a better collaboration? I think that's really important. We've started to see it on the SDGs. We have a number of networks, but more. And it shouldn't be a problem with young people. I think that young people have got a lot of value to bring here, particularly in connecting. But I would say that the real place for this is action research, more work with civil society, because they're on the ground, they're closest to it, and that would really help us to look at the case for scale from that.
Thank you very much for your answers. I now invite Ms. Adrienne Clarkson to join us in the podium for the closing remarks. Thank you very much. Adrienne Clarkson is a former Governor General of Canada, is one of the directors of Global Center for Pluralism, is co-founder of the Institute for Canadian Citizenship, and a renowned journalist. Thank you very much.
As I see you clap and hear you clap, I think you are acknowledging how privileged we all are to have been at this talk by Amina Mohammed. The Guardian, when she was appointed by Guterres as Deputy Secretary-General, had the edifying headline, "Goat Herder's Daughter, #2 at the UN." That is something that I am sure she's quite used to, as all women in public life are used to headlines like that. But she is an example of something so shining and so bright and so beautiful. The encapsulation of two worlds, of two races. A woman who is a Muslim, who is strong, who has been able to move from the world of private sector business into the world of science, into the world of world government, is somebody that we have to listen to. Because you won't hear voices like that very often. Because you don't hear voices from somebody in that kind of position of power who talks about their children and their grandchildren and the aspirations of their child. Because women do think differently. Women behave differently when they are in positions of power. And they behave that way and they think that way because it is a very positive thing to be the bearers of life. And that's what women understand themselves to be. And women understand themselves, no matter how high a position they reach, they realize that they are the ones who ensure the continuance of human life on its most basic level. Everybody has a mother. Everybody has a mother, and the mother's instinct, the mother's idea of being able to give life and everything that comes with that, the idea of nurturing, the idea of seeing something through from very unpromising beginnings, which babies are, difficult, I think many of us are not made out to be mothering or maternal, and it is a shock to feel the revulsion in your body when you hear a baby crying at 3 o'clock in the morning and you have to be the one getting up to go to it. But you go through that, and when you bring that to your public life and to your public commitments and to all the things that are offered to you, you become somebody like Amina Mohamed. She is an example to all of us. She is an example of what you can achieve. She is an example of how you can take what has been given to you in terms of intelligence, in terms of the cards that are dealt to you, which you have to play. They're only a certain number, and they're not going to change, but it depends on how you play them. And I thank you so much for this privilege of listening to you in the context of this annual lecture for the Global Center for Pluralism. You have given us so much with your thoughtful humanity, your incisive intelligence, and what is very noticeable and which is always important in somebody who has reached the heights that you have, that there is courage behind everything that you say. And courage is the most important of virtues because it guarantees all the others. Thank you so much.